Good afternoon, South by. My name is Mark Pesce. 44 years and 6 weeks ago exactly, I matriculated as a freshman at MIT. It was the only place I'd ever wanted to go to school. And I have to tell you, weird things started happening as soon as I got there because it turns out the undergraduates get pulled into all sorts of crazy research projects. For example, one of my friends came home from the material science lab with this thing, and he said, my professor said we should try to destroy it. So a whole dorm of 18-year-olds did everything they could to take this black thing and even dent it. What we didn't know, it was the first carbon composite any of us had seen. They're now in aircraft, they're now in bicycles, they're now everywhere. A few weeks later, another friend of mine told me about this amazing project that he was working on called the architecture machine. And when I was listening to what he was talking about, building simulations of cities in 3D that you could walk through, before I even knew what virtual reality was, I could see what it would be. I could see what Google Earth would be. And then, as I would walk up and down the infinite corridor, I would pass this glassed-in room filled with computer terminals, part of something called Project Athena. Project Athena is the foundation for the way we network all computers together today. And that was just in my first few weeks at the Institute. And by the way, because I was a 17-year-old, I was woken up by cranes at 7 a.m. every morning because they were building a new building next to my dormitory. Turns out that was the Media Lab. MIT has always been at the core of science and technology, but more than that, it has always been at the core of communicating science and technology. And the flagship for doing that is a publication that's 125 years old called MIT Technology Review. And we have the great good fortune of having the CEO and publisher of MIT Technology Review, Elizabeth Bramson-Boudreau, here with us today. Please welcome her to the South by Southwest Sydney stage.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. You are all behind very bright lights, so I trust you're there and excited. So before I begin my presentation, I want to personally acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I am standing on today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. This acknowledgement is something I've learned about since I've been in Australia as a sign of respect to traditional owners, and my intent is to bring it back to my home in Boston, the lands of the Massachusetts tribe. So it is a great honor and a pleasure to be with all of you and such a well-organized event as this. And Mark's kind words of introduction give me great pleasure to follow. So as I usually am, today I'm going to be talking about new technology, particularly those that we think have the potential to change the way we all live and work. I am often asked to do this sort of talk because I have a unique vantage point as the publisher of MIT Technology Review. I want to start by introducing MIT Technology Review to you all. We are a media company. We are owned by MIT, and we publish journalism for current and future tech leaders, people like yourselves. If you don't know of us already, despite the way our name may sound, we're not an academic journal. We are journalists that are telling the stories of people and technologies that are being used to change our lives and how they will impact us all. So that's a photograph, a couple of photographs of the MIT campus, and we are inspired by our relationship with MIT, which is the world's leading university for engineering, physical sciences, computer science, and mathematics. MIT alumni and faculty include 101 Nobel laureates, 26 Turing Award winners, and more astronauts than any university other than the US Naval Academy. I should say the 101 Nobel laureates in the last week has increased by 3. This week, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, I'm not sure of the days of the week when I'm in Australia. This week, 2 MIT professors won the economics prize, and last week, an MIT alum shared the award for physiology or medicine. So, very big week for us and a very distinguished honor. MIT's influence in the business community could be argued to be even more noteworthy. In 2015, a group of academics studied the number of number of companies that had been founded by MIT alumni. There were 30,000 of them in 2015. And collectively, those 30,000 companies had generated revenue of $2 trillion. That was more than the GDP of the 10th largest country in the world, which in 2015 placed it between Russia and India. MIT is known for all of this, of course, but it's also known for a hacker culture, a playfulness, a creative side to it. This is an image of the Media Lab, and Mark mentioned the Media Lab. This is the way that students will tackle a problem, they'll mock up some sort of a product, they'll try it out and see if it will help to solve the problem or address the issue that they're trying to address. So out of this incredible institution was born a journalistic enterprise, MIT Technology Review, and as Mark mentioned, this year, 2024, is the 125th anniversary. And from its first days, the purpose of MIT Technology Review has been to explain the always new and ever more complex problems we face as a society, and to share the stories of what humans can accomplish with the right amount of know-how, creativity, and commitment. And this is the first issue. And in that first issue, we have all of them in our archives. There's an article, the first article is called The Function of a Laboratory. So we're talking going way back. Today, however, we are a multi-platform media company, publishing in digital on our website and in our app every day. We have a number of newsletters, email newsletters, we have a print magazine, and we have podcasts and live events. We are aimed at anyone who's interested in the future of our world and how technology is changing it, but who aren't necessarily experts, who didn't go to MIT, who aren't engineers or scientists. Our main coverage areas are artificial intelligence, climate technology, computing, and biotech. Every day, our reporters are looking across these areas that they cover, reading new papers, talking to experts, to identify technologies and trends or shifts that people need to know about. I also like to say that we don't write about technology for technology's sake. We care about impact, and we want to understand how these technologies, which of them will have the greatest impact on our world, whether it's a positive or a negative. Does a new technology have a real path to commercialization? Can it get funded so it can scale? These are all considerations of our team when we determine what to write about. Now, today, we are going to go on a real tour around the topic areas that I mentioned. We're going to talk about AI, climate tech, computing, and biotechnology. So first, let's go. AI. This is pretty much all anybody has wanted to talk about since late 2022, when ChatGPT was first released. I am sure that this is no surprise to anyone in this room, but we are seeing extremely rapid progress in generative AI. Generative AI, of course, is an enabling technology for potentially every industry and sector, and demand for generative AI is now driving investment and advances in computing. I've seen estimates of generative AI contributing trillions of dollars to the global economy in the coming years. I was seeing figures around $3 to $4 trillion, and then in my hotel room 2 nights ago, CNN said $15 trillion. I'm not sure anybody knows. Strong adopters of AI companies could add anywhere from 10 to 30% of revenue. Look, these are all just estimates. and it's going to depend on how companies use it. But the reasons are, at least at this point, pretty clear. It's about efficiency gains, it's about greater customer engagement, new revenue streams, and faster time to market. So with all that in the backdrop, the model makers are pushing forward, and we've seen astounding new abilities just in the last few months. Many of the models have gone from dealing mostly in text to processing more inputs like audio and video, and are now gaining the ability to work through a whole bunch of different kinds of problems. In July of this past year, July 2024, Google DeepMind announced 2 new systems called Alpha Proof and Alpha Geometry 2 that can do fairly advanced math, kind of on the level of a very smart high school student. And just last month, OpenAI revealed its new O1 model, which had previously been called Strawberry, and the company said that this model can reason in multiple steps and perform even better than its predecessors in coding and math and responding to questions in specific scientific domains. So these things are advancing quite steadily. One recent generative AI development that I think is particularly cool, Roblox is building a 3D, Roblox the game environment, is building a 3D foundation model and making it open source to allow people to construct 3D environments from just a simple text prompt. So that's something about a backpack that, out it comes. Once it's up and running, developers on the platform can use a simple phrase like, generate a racetrack in the desert, and the AI will spin one up. Users can modify the scenes or expand the scope, like they could say change it to a daytime scene to a nighttime scene, or switch the desert for a forest or something like that. And developers can already create these sorts of scenes now manually in the platform, but this new generative AI model, Roblox says, can make the changes happen in just a fraction of the time. It claims it will give developers with only minimal 3D art skills the ability to craft even more compelling environments. It's not live yet, but I think it's going to be very interesting to see what it does, particularly when you think about people without any kind of game design or coding experience and their ability to create new virtual worlds. So, lots of demand for generative AI. You know that requires a lot, to run generative AI models requires a lot of computing power and a lot of energy to power the servers that will run the systems. So we hosted a conversation for our readers, we periodically do this, to talk about this concern. Is AI going to drive up energy demand and emissions, and if so, what can we do? Sometimes you'll hear people say that AI can help optimize and can help reduce the amount of energy demand. So the question we wanted to look at is, what is actually the expected outcome? And training and running generative AI certainly uses up a lot of power. That's true for lots of things, like electronic EVs or heat pumps. The key is, though, where is this power coming from? Can we power it with renewables or nuclear, and also build enough capacity to replace an increasing share of fossil fuels? Some tech companies are investing in new capacity themselves. What's really interesting, I'm not sure how much this made the headlines in Australia, but Microsoft announced plans in the US to reopen the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant. And that's famous, really famous in the US, because in the late 1970s, it partially melted down in an accident. And the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant disaster, it was, I think, late, like 1979 or something like that, was something that, really scared a lot of Americans, like most Americans, and set back the development of nuclear energy in the US for decades, and never recovered from that. So it's very interesting that Microsoft has decided to be so vocal about restarting that plant. So with a lot of advancements in AI, there are some fundamental advancements that are also needing to take place in computing to support AI. There's a lot to talk about here. It's, in itself another talk. But what's top of mind right now is if you look at quantum computing. So PsiQuantum is a company that is planning today to build the world's largest quantum computer with up to 1 million qubits. They're going to do this in Chicago. It's going to take them about a decade. Right now, the largest quantum computer is at about 1,000 qubits, so this is about 1,000x improvement or a leap over that. They're taking a different approach to people like Google or IBM because they use photons for the qubits, which means that their machines could operate at higher temperatures than superconducting systems. It's a bold plan, but I'm sure you all know that quantum computing can potentially unlock more advanced and faster simulations of things like chemical reactions, drug discoveries, weather systems, analyzing weather systems, which is, of course, becoming more and more important to us, building models of supply chains and transportation routes, loads of things like that. Lastly, I'll just mention that in our AI and computing coverage, we consider a lot AI's economic impact and whether this technology will lead to gains in productivity and a meaningful improvement in people's lives. That's a question that gets discussed a lot. In fact, there's two MIT professors that share the economics prize this week. That's one of the topics that they've been focused on, is around the impact on productivity and people's lives. And essentially, they're saying that there's some concern about it because the improvement in productivity has slowed, and what's even more clear is that the benefits in productivity have tended to accrue to the wealthiest, not the workers. So there's a question about what that might mean and what that might augur for AI. So I want to talk about a related field, which is robotics. It's not a tech presentation without a video of robots. And so I aim to please. I do love a robot video. We all love a robot video. So for loads of years, it always felt like robots were never quite delivering on the promise that we all may have had when we watched the Jetsons. You'd see some neat demonstrations of robots doing specific things, or like scary. You've seen the scary ones where the robots look like the Terminator and they look like they're incredibly physically fit. It was clear that those, whatever they were doing in those particular videos was kind of the only thing they could do in that specific environment, and maybe they weren't even that great at it. There are some very funny videos that look at robots falling over or failing at doing some pretty simple tasks. So the dream of like the household robot that can help you do a number of different chores has felt distant and continuously sort of moving off in the distance in the future. Roomba is really the most commercially successful robot we've got. Roomba, by the way, it occurs to me, was set up by an MIT alum. And Roombas can get stuck and suck up shoelaces and all kinds of stuff. So there's, even that most successful of the commercial available robots isn't an unambiguous success. There's some work involved in improving these robots using large language models and new training techniques. We've done a lot of work looking at the convergence of cheaper hardware, better data, and these training methods based on generative AI, and how all these three things collide to create kind of an inflection point in the field. And that's ultimately what that print issue cover story is about. Some of this work is making multimodal foundation models specifically for robots, like the OpenAI spin-out covariant, and building big data sets with spatial information and 3D context clues, which can only happen as the large language models get more sophisticated. So hopefully, as these models have a basic understanding of physical rules of moving in the world and physical laws, we'll find robots that aren't trying to violate physical principles with actions, and therefore greater success. Drones are another type of robot, of course, and what's interesting about drones is they have never been cheaper than they are today, something that is impacting security and warfare in particular. We have been watching the wide-scale availability of military drones. These are very inexpensive, like certainly less than $10,000, many even cheaper than that, and they can be fitted with explosives, and they have really changed modern warfare, and we've seen them in conflicts, including the Russia-Ukraine war. There are some supply chain concerns impacting drones. China has been dominating electronics manufacturing. You know that. That's been happening for years. And they basically own drone manufacturing. So the chart there, the multicolored chart there, was a piece of work done by an MIT professor called Fiona Murray, who's also the vice chair of the NATO Innovation Fund. And it argues that there's a missing middle in technological investment in the US, which means that the space between sort of far off emerging technologies and rapid deployment, that there's too much space between these far off emerging technologies and the deployment of them. And so that's about investment in manufacturing and industrial capacity. And so what they did is they made a bill of goods to order all the materials for building a drone and found that most of them are constructed in China, even though they're invented in the US or Japan or Europe. So I'm going to put this here for a moment. So what is that? That's a QR code, which gives you a discount on a subscription to MIT Technology Review because, you know, I'm in it for the money, guys. And so I'll put this back up a little bit later, so this is not your only chance, but I would encourage you to please take a look. We publish digitally. You can also get it by The Slow Boat. I spoke to Mark. Mark gets his magazine by The Slow Boat. He claims he gets it in a pretty timely way. So I want to switch topics now to one of the biggest, arguably, challenge we face as a society, and that's climate change. Our coverage, really what we focus on are the technologies that can reduce emissions or mitigate the impact of climate change. We are living really in an extraordinary time. Our economy is undergoing a profound transformation to clean energy sources. And while we will surely face new challenges, we will also unlock a lot of opportunities, particularly as we look at electrifying everything. There has been a lot of progress already. We have been monitoring long-lasting grid batteries for a number of years because these are very, very important to incorporating renewable power into the grid and evening out fluctuations in solar and wind. It's clear now, like for example, in California, there's a lot of these batteries that have been deployed, and they are now helping to reduce the number of rolling blackouts in the heat wave periods of time when everyone's got their air conditioners on at full blast. And we saw that impact in this past US summer, so a few months ago, compared to 4 years ago. There is a lot more work to be done, of course, and one of the most consistent things that we're looking at is the big sectors of the economy that are particularly difficult to decarbonize, like making cement or steel, or producing industrial heat that factories need to manufacture things at a high temperature, or dealing with methane emissions from cows, or shipping, or aviation. Those are sort of the big ones. Later on in the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some companies that are doing some interesting things there. But before that, minerals. This is a chunk of neodymium. It's a metal that we are going to need a lot more of because it is used in all sorts of things, including wind turbines. With a shift from fossil fuel sources to renewable energy sources, there is a lot of demand for different kinds of materials. That's like lithium, that's copper, that's nickel. They're needed to make batteries. They're needed for solar panels and other things like that. And how this is driving a lot of need for mining around the world. We did a piece on a mine. That's what these images come from. A mine that was being proposed in the state of Minnesota in the US, and the tensions in that community about placing the mine in their town. There was some local pushback, and the US government put a lot of money into it because there is a lot of money in subsidies through the US Inflation Reduction Act that can offset some of the concerns, or is meant to offset some of the concerns. And that one mine is meant to unlock some billions of dollars in subsidies through the Inflation Reduction Act. But there's still a lot of question about where you should place these mines, where you should put these mines in communities and the impact of those. It's going to very likely result in some geopolitical impact because there is going to be demand for minerals and materials that come from parts of the world that haven't had people haven't had a lot of interest in, perhaps. And what is that going to mean when there is a scarce material in a country that is perhaps one of the poorer countries in the world. How are we going to manage that as a geopolitically? So I want to talk about climate adaptation. So again, realities of climate change. We know that it's already here. They're only going to get worse for most people. We're talking about climate change a lot in this last couple of weeks because in the US, we just had 2 very big hurricanes, sort of once in a generation hurricanes that came through 1 week after the next in the Southeast United States. And, I think people had sort of thought, well, North Carolina is probably a place where you can, which is where the first of those 2 storms hit. That's a place where you can hide out the climate crisis. It's like sort of it's far from the coast, this particular part of the state. It's far from the coast, so you don't have the issue with the rising sea levels and the soil erosion and so forth, but yet they had a lot of problems with flooding and the destruction of the countryside. And indeed, I think this idea that there are certain places where one can hide out from climate change is beginning to slip away. So we're going to be looking at adaptation. We have written about new low-emission forms of air conditioning that use alternative refrigerants, a new satellite that can spot wildfires earlier so they can be stopped from spreading as far, and there's going to be a lot more solutions we're going to need here besides. Biotech and bioengineering. These are topics we are coming back to again and again. I think of all of the areas we cover is the one I sort of feel most connected to, I guess because I'm a person, a human. But we are getting a lot more control over our bodies and the choices that we have about our health. And there are some very interesting ethical questions that this brings, like who gets to make these choices, what it means for society, and kind of to what end. There are a few areas that this comes up the most. One is, of course, gene editing, which involve making changes to our DNA, the very stuff that makes us, who we are. There are lots of reasons to do this and to change your DNA. Maybe there's a hereditary disease in your family. Maybe we can reduce your risk or your child's risk of developing a condition. What's interesting too is that there are people who are maybe interested in using these technologies to choose the hair or the eye color, or maybe they want their child to be tall or in some other physical ideal. There's some very big ethical issues around that. One of our editors who particularly covers this topic was the reporter who broke a very big story about 6 years ago about 3 babies who had been gene edited, the first ever gene edited babies with CRISPR. There was a Chinese scientist who edited these embryos to protect them against HIV. There was a familiar vulnerability to HIV. So he altered, using CRISPR technologies, their DNA, and then they were born. And our reporter broke that story, happened to be in China at the time and was digging around and learned of this. And this scientist went to prison in China for 3 years. It was a very big story. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. And just a couple of months ago, he caught up. He's no longer in prison. He's out now. He caught up with our reporter and our editor-in-chief, and they did a live virtual event for our subscribers and talked about what he's been up to since. He is insistent that he's not planning on doing any more of this, I would hope. But it does raise questions about, this is a capability that has at least been tested in that situation, and what will we do with that know-how now? What's also interesting is, there are some situations where we could say, well, maybe we do stand behind the use of this technology, like there is a small change in the APP gene, which is thought to protect against Alzheimer's disease. And anyone who knows, that disease intimately knows how terrible it is. And the idea of reducing the vulnerability one may have to that is, of course, very appealing. It reduces the production of brain plaques that build up and that cause memory loss. Today, the people who have that genetic, that gene are just lucky, but CRISPR would give that protection if we were to use it in that way to many more people if we wanted to. And there's a lot of examples that, like this. There is a drug that is on the market today, commercially available on the market, and we've written about this one too, which uses CRISPR to alter the gene of people who are vulnerable or who are struggling with sickle cell disease. Now, sickle cell disease is a very painful and ultimately deadly disease that affects people who are of African descent. And it is now commercially available. It's extraordinarily expensive. The company is called Vertex, and that has already been tested and is being used. So it's not particularly easy to administer this. It is, again, very costly, but over time, we can expect that those things, those sort of inhibitors, to fall away. Another topic we've been looking at is longevity, which is essentially extending human lifespan. One of our reporters did this test on herself. She's based in London, and she went to one of these online calculators. This one happens to be the UK Office for National Statistics, and she put in her sex and her age, and maybe answered a couple of questions about. I think she put in her weight as well, and it told her she was going to live to be 88. She's in her 30s, late 30s, and that she has about a 10% chance of reaching 100. 10% chance of reaching 100 is not bad. I happen to do this as well. I'm a little older than my 30s. I got a little over 85 years old. Which I thought, okay, that's great, but I went in search of another calculator. I didn't like that one. And then I found one that said I would live to be 92, so that's one I'm going to go with. So many researchers and tech entrepreneurs, you'll see this a lot, particularly happening around Silicon Valley, where you've got a lot of wealth. These are people who are pushing the limits of what their bodies can do to see how long they can live. And there's a lot around really restricting calories, restricting a number of different kinds of external, sort of external stimuli, a lot around sleep. And they're pouring a ton of money into this to look at how they might extend the lifespan. There are a couple of approaches. One is cellular reprogramming. That's taking adult cells, turning back the clock to make them younger, more like stem cells that can develop into many different kinds of cells, and then replacing those, if you've got some sort of disease, replacing them with your own younger cells. There are some safety issues with that, and it's not particularly, it's not ready for public use, but it is in development. Another approach is clearing out older cells, which are called senescent cells, which can build up in tissue and cause damage. There's been some very promising work done in mice around this, but not so far too much around humans. XPRIZE is offering $101 million for any scientist who can restore at least 10 years of muscle, cognition, and immune function to elderly people. So the race is on for that kind of reward. There's a lot we don't know about aging and how it actually happens. And there's also all kinds of ethical or sort of moral issues around whether we need to live longer. Is it really necessary, and what would it mean for society? And particularly if you look at the certain numbers of wealthy people, it's going to be the people who have access to available money for these sorts of treatments. How do we feel about certain portions of our population living longer than others? That's not a question for me to answer, but probably all of us to consider. A related topic is the future of reproduction. There's a lot changing around how we make babies. Probably many of you, certainly I remember I was young, but I do remember the first IVF baby born. I remember it on the nightly news when I was a young kid. And now, of course, I know that all of you know at least one person who has made a child using IVF. It has very much gone mainstream. There is some work, and that's what this sort of short video is showing. There is some work that's being done now to automate IVF, which can make that more affordable and maybe improve the success, to make it easier for people to have children. So there are about half dozen companies that are working to build robots like these that can fertilize eggs or incubate embryos. They can really only do one thing now, which is inject the sperm into eggs, but there are other steps in the process. But in the long term, the idea is that this could be available in any gynecologist's office as a more routine process rather than only for specialized and expensive clinics. Now, even less common, but I think more interesting perhaps, is it is now possible, or maybe it's becoming possible, to create a baby from 3 people's DNA combined. This was done a few years ago for the first time to address a genetic predisposition that a mother had. She had a potentially fatal disease in her mitochondria. Mitochondria, you remember from biology in high school, provides energy to cells. In her case, she had a potential fatal disease in her mitochondrial DNA. So a donor provided that mitochondrial DNA that was incorporated into the embryo that came from her egg and her partner's sperm. So you had 3 parents, or 3 DNA from 3 different individuals in that child. There's also been some very interesting proof of concept experiments about a year and a half ago by scientists in Japan who took 2 male mice and used cells from those 2 male mice, to produce a healthy offspring. They transformed some of the cells into eggs and then fertilized those eggs and implanted those embryos into female mice. So we showed that it is, at least in mice, possible to use 2 cells of the same sex to produce offspring. That is kind of mind-blowing. And who knows, maybe they will show that this can be done in other kinds of animals like humans. So another interesting biotech topic is efforts by different scientists, by companies, by researchers, entrepreneurs to generate organs. And this is an illustration we put in around this story of kind of an organ factory. It's a little dystopian. The idea is that they will generate organs in this future world that can be just transplanted into people who need them. Like, we're talking about hearts, lungs, kidneys, livers. Those are generally the most common organs that people need, and an awful lot of people die every year because there's not enough available organs. So scientists are trying to make organs, growing them in animals. We reported on a man in the US who underwent surgery at the University of Maryland a couple of years ago. He received a heart grown in a pig that had been gene edited so that it would be compatible with his body. He lived for a few months with that heart beating inside him. He died. His death was not related to the heart. It was he had a lot of health issues associated with his problematic heart. But it has been shown that he could live for a few months. There's also been a kidney transplant, similarly, from an animal to a human. There's another person with severe liver disease who, in my hometown of Boston, received an injection of liver cells from a donor into his lymph nodes. And this company is called Ligenesis, led the work. He took those cells, they took those cells to generate what's called an organoid. An organoid is kind of a miniature liver inside his own body, which could then be grown and then used to replace his own liver. I mean, wild stuff, right? There's a lot of these things that are going on that have been undergoing research for a long time. It's still early stages, but it could really change medicine. There's an entrepreneur called Martine Rathblatt. Look her up. Her company is called United Therapeutics. Really fascinating story and really fascinating work she's done. Now, I have gone through kind of the big areas that we cover, and now I'm going to talk about our lists. Like any good magazine, we have our lists. Everybody loves their lists. The reason is because people like you guys pay attention to lists. So we're giving you what you want. One of the ones that is most famous and that is is being worked on right now is what's called our 10 breakthrough technologies. And if I was here in January, that would probably be all I was talking about. But the list I have from 2024 is a little bit stale. It's been on our site for many months, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're looking ahead. So since 2001, we have been creating a list of 10 new technologies or innovations that we think will be game changers and that have staying power. All of these are at critical breakthrough moments, which means that, and it's either just happened or it's coming. What it means is that they have just maybe received some funding, they've just reached scale. There's a number of different reasons that we would call them breakthroughs. Our team is working about 6 to 8 months ahead of time on a list, then they're having arguments about the list, and then they're voting, and then ultimately our editor-in-chief takes the final decision. Not all of these are positive developments, so we're not endorsing these technologies. For instance, I mentioned the drone warfare. Last year, I think it was, we had drones used in warfare on our list because we had seen that prices for these small but really powerful drones had fallen to a point where it was clear that we were going to see them in many, many more conflicts, which again had already happened in Ukraine and Russia. So we're not, we weren't endorsing that. Of course, we were saying it's at a powerful moment, so sort of this inflection point, and it was worth paying attention to. So our list, as I say, comes out each January. We're working on it now, and it highlights what we think matter most. Just to go back, we've been doing this list since 2001, and these are kind of a selection of covers from the issues that we publish with the lists in it. And I'll just name a couple of things. So 2001, which was the first year we did it, that year we had brain-machine interfaces on the list. Now, brain-machine interfaces are behind Elon Musk's company Neuralink, which you probably have heard about, which I think is a 2016 company. We had it on the list in 2001. Natural language processing was also on the list in 2001, and that's the approach that sort of underpins or drives large language models like those we're using in ChatGPT. So unlike, if I can just brag for a moment, unlike a lot of publishers out there who are writing about ChatGPT and AI, we've really been doing this for years and years and years. I could say 2009, we talked about smart assistants like Alexa and Siri. 2012, we talked about crowdfunding. It had been around a little while, but platforms in 2012 really made it possible to scale crowdfunding. 2014 was CRISPR, and we called that the biggest biotech discovery of the century. 2016, reusable rockets. Just a couple of days ago, we saw SpaceX shoot off the rocket and then pull it back to the base. Reusable rockets really is a game changer for space exploration. And so on and so forth. I can't tell you what's going to be on our list in 2025, but I can tell you a little bit, some of the things I've already touched on are going to be on that list in some capacity. But I can tell you about some things that we've decided not to put on the list, and I certainly hope they don't change their minds between now and January, but anyway. And it's not that they're not interesting to us, it's just that we can only pick 10, and we have to make some tough calls, and sometimes it's about timing. So the first thing that's not going to be on the list is virtual power plants. These, I didn't know what these were. These are digital systems that utilities use to measure and manage the flow of power across the grid. And this becomes really important as they link up more kinds of energy generation, like solar and wind, and of course the storage grid too, like batteries or people's EVs. So in Baltimore, in the United States, there is a project that is using Ford's F-150 Lightning trucks. Those are the great big EV trucks. I mean, great big by Australian standards, by US standards, they are trucks, but they are massive vehicles. They are managed by a virtual power plant. It pulls these vehicles together and uses it to power homes. This is also happening in China and Taiwan. We're not featuring it because although we're hearing of a few examples, there's not that many, and so it's a little early. Another technology we considered was AI agents, and these are the rage. You probably are hearing about AI agents. These will schedule your meetings, book your trips, carry out all kinds of tasks online that connect across your system. They know that you like to fly a certain airlines, that you like to sit in a particular kind of seat, an aisle or a bulkhead or whatever. They know that when you travel in certain areas, you like to reach out to certain friends or you don't like to reach out to certain friends, depending. And they pull all those things together and organize. In this example, we're talking about travel, but they can do this in lots of other realms, and coordinate along the way. Look, I think this is a very exciting development because I definitely don't want to spend more time on email and logistics than I have to, but it's still early. There are some challenges like making sure the agent, I'm sure you have had this experience, like to really make sure the agent knows what you mean, the AI knows what you mean when you ask for something, reliably understanding it and carrying it out. There are some interoperability challenges across the systems we use, so this is still too far off for us to include. You guys, there's one of these on the floor, on the expo floor. So I have not heard back from the folks in Cambridge, but I did say, you guys, I'm about to tell them we're not putting this on the list. And there's one, I have a photo of it on my phone. So this is an EVTOL. This is an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. You can think of them as like large drones or electric helicopters. There's been some real progress there, as evidenced, and there's quite a bit of interest in some parts of the aviation industry in the United States and in China, and there are manufacturers that are doing test flights. The company that's got the aircraft in here is XPeng, and they have a license to mass produce the vehicles. And they are taking orders. They're talking about, I think, 2028. Other countries, including South Korea and the UAE, have put policies in place to allow people to operate these vehicles. In the US, the company Archer has gotten FAA approval to begin commercial testing. None of them have actually started commercial operations yet, so we are watching this space for now and did not include it on the list, or will not include it on the list. There is that QR code, second chance to grab it. We are making our way to another list. So what I've done is I've taken you through sort of our coverage areas, and I've talked about kind of what we look at in technologies that are going to break out and some things that we're interested in, but we think is still perhaps a little too far out. Another list that we do looks at promising young researchers. All of those folks are under the age of 35. It's our Innovators Under 35 list. These are just incredibly talented and driven and passionate people. This list of individuals came out a few weeks ago. We like to look at this group at this list and these sorts of people, and they're nominated through academics at various places around the world, as well as folks who are in private research labs and company labs. This is kind of the way we chart the future, looking at what the young folks are, what the most promising young people in their fields of AI, materials science, computing, and biotech, what they're working on today, because we think that gives us a sense of where the future may go. Now, in materials science, look, there's about 5 or 6 people in material science. I'm not going to talk about all of them. There is a guy, I just picked kind of a little bit randomly from the lists. There is a guy called Jinpeng Zhao, who's 32, who invented a glass-based coating that can cool the roof of a building by around 3.5 degrees Celsius below ambient air temperature, which can reduce the air conditioning energy use by about 10% for a mid-rise building. And cooling materials have been around for a while. That's not actually that new, but most are based on polymers and plastics that can't take lots and lots of exposure, that begin to sort of break down when exposed to the elements. So they lose a lot of performance over time. He solved this problem by working with finely ground glass and aluminum oxide instead of plastics. It can be spray painted and painted on buildings, vehicles, and roads. He has a company that he's founded called Ceracool, and he's working on expanding the applications, a range of coatings for a whole lot of other applications. Now, in the biotechnology field, and again, there's several people on the list who are biotechnologists, but these people are looking at investigating the nature of disease and how technology can help us live longer, healthier lives. There is a guy called Alejandro Castrejon, and in 2021, he grew mouse embryos ex utero, which is to say outside of the uterus, inside a rotating bottle under a specific level of gas pressure and bathed in human blood, which sounds terrible. The mouse embryos survived about a third of the 19-day gestation period, long enough to develop brains and fast-beating hearts. So no mammal had ever developed so extensively outside of its mother. And there's the platypus, that's an exception. But in general, this had not been done. And there are lots of interesting implications for what that could mean if it could be expanded to humans, for instance. On the robotics list, again, lots of development in robotics. They are getting faster, they are getting better. Generative AI is part of that. And what's interesting is there is a woman called Sharon Song who heads the Robotics and Embodied AI Lab at Stanford University, at the forefront of that shift and working on making robots more useful, particularly giving robots a new sense, which is one of hearing. So most robots are usually navigating with sight through cameras, and that's a problem if there's a low visibility environment. So her lab is capturing audio, which makes the robots much better at like erasing a whiteboard or emptying a cup, because they're able to use another sense. So it's very interesting to look at how the multiple senses are being integrated to improve robotics. Climate and energy. There's a lot to decarbonize. There's a lot of ways to tackle some pretty challenging sectors like air travel, like cement manufacturing, both of which use a lot of carbon. A guy called Zhenkun or Elvis Cow he's 32. He wants to make, I love this one. He wants to make air travel carbon neutral. So do I, that sounds great. He created a device that mimics photosynthesis and turns carbon dioxide into airplane fuel. Perfect. So air travel makes up a lot of, 2% of global carbon emissions. Artificial photosynthesis is when scientists combine light, carbon dioxide, and water in a reactor to create a synthetic fuel. And it can be used as a decarbonization tool. It's been really hard to make it scalable and cost efficient. So he's using optics, the field of optics, using a waveguide which focuses light in the area where the reaction takes place. And he's using a special panel called a baffle, which efficiently mixes CO2 and hydrogen to keep the reactor at an ideal temperature. Phase change materials emit and absorb heat as they solidify and melt. Wow. What's interesting is that United Airlines is purchasing 300 million gallons of this synthetic fuel from him over the next 20 years, which when you look at it that way is not as much, but it's a start. And they're going to start powering flights with these fuels. They will still emit carbon dioxide, so that makes them carbon neutral, not carbon negative. But Cao, who is a PhD in mechanical engineering from Cornell University, he has this idea, and I love this, to put a device that could be attached directly behind the plane's exhaust pipe and convert the CO2 emitted into fuel in real time, which would actually prevent the greenhouse gas from ever entering the atmosphere. Look, I don't know if that's going to work, but it sounds absolutely brilliant. And lastly, the last area I'm going to talk about around these young innovators is AI. And again, many people in AI are doing very cool things. Many of them appear on our list. We are intelligence. What you probably have noticed, or you've probably seen the image generating models like DALL-E 2 and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion that they were really a big part of what made everybody so excited about generative AI in late 2022, because you could put prompts in and you could get these designs, you could get these art back. Artists started to say, look, I'm concerned about the similarity between these AI-generated images and my art. And some of them found that their work had been scraped into data sets to train AI models, and they had some concerns about that because it was knocking off their creative style. So there is a tool that has been built to help the artist fight back against this, and it's very cool. A guy called Sean Shan, who's 26, is a PhD student at the University of Chicago in computer science. And so he coded an algorithm behind something called Glaze. This is a tool that lets artists mask their personal style from mimicry by AI. Came out in early 2023. And then last October, so yes, about almost a year ago, he introduced another tool called Nightshade, which you may have heard of, and it adds an invisible layer of kind of poison on top of the images, which will stop the image-generating AI models from incorporating that image into their data sets. It kind of spoils the data set. And if enough of this poison is drawn into a machine learning training data, it could even break the models. So it's a protection against, it's kind of like a poison pill. So both algorithms work by, both of these, Glaze and Nightshade, add visible changes to the pixel of images and disrupt these models. So it's been a huge success. It's been downloaded Glaze has been downloaded 3.5 million times, Nightshade about 1 million times. It's integrated into a bunch of new platforms, and it has made, at least, to an extent, artists feel a bit more protected when they upload their images. So he is on our list as well. And the final thing that I'm going to talk about are climate tech companies. And these are companies that we think are making a meaningful impact around climate change by reducing emissions or mitigating the impact of global warming. So we are at the center of a lot of really interesting conversations, and we are paying attention to a number of different technologies that we think could make a difference. And we kind of think of them as falling into three different categories. These sorts of companies, that what they're doing, kind of three different categories of focus. So the first is about scaling quickly. We need scale because addressing climate change is requiring tens of billions, to go from tens of billions of metric tons of carbon dioxide every year to a net zero. So we have to really move quickly. And so one of the companies on our list is probably one you've heard of, which is BYD. This is now the world's largest electric vehicle producer. They have pretty much taken the name of sort of that honor from Tesla. Another company that we are looking at is called LanzaJet. This is a company that produces alternative jet fuel, and they can now produce each year about 9 million gallons of alternative jet fuel. And now that's just a fraction. We use billions of gallons of jet fuel each year, but it is a major step forward, which is why we put it on the list. There's also a company called First Solar, which is based in the United States, and it is a US solar manufacturer that is scaling very quickly. They opened a $1.1 billion factory in Alabama in the southern United States, and they have another one planned for next year in Louisiana. So that's one thing. It's about scaling quickly. The second category is about taking old problems and looking at solving them with new technologies. And that's things like, what are we doing around powering of vehicles, but what are we doing around things like the shampoo bottles that we all use, or sidewalks that emit huge amounts of planet warming pollution. So we've looked at companies that are tackling some of these important but maybe less visible problems. There is a company that's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is where MIT is located, called Sublime Systems, that is scaling up its electrochemical process to make cement with significantly lower emissions than conventional. There is a company as well called Solugen, which is in chemicals, which makes chemicals with biological starting ingredients rather than fossil fuels. So it starts from a biological starting point as opposed to fossil fuels. And they have a factory in Houston and another one in Minnesota. So that's about old problems with new technologies, new solutions. And then finally, climate tech is a massive category, and it's really touching each industry. It is very tricky to try and represent all the industries that we want to. We could have probably put 15 companies working on batteries alone. We could have had, any number of energy companies, transportation companies, but there's also agriculture, there's chemicals, there's fuels, there's climate adaptation, which we didn't even talk about. And so it's a very much an umbrella term. There is an Australian company, and we heard from its CEO on one of our subscriber webinars. The company is called Ruminate, I don't know if it's well known here or not, but they make supplements for cows that cuts down on how much methane they belch out, which is a non-trivial issue. There's also a company on that list called Pano AI, which installs camera stations that pair up with AI to better detect wildfires, which are, of course, getting much worse as the planet heats up. There is a lot of work to do to make the kind of progress that we need to make in climate change, and so we are going to be paying close attention to the companies that are coming up with the most clever, the most meaningful solutions. Phew, so this is a lot, and I hope this very quick run through of such a vast number of innovations spurs all of you to think and imagine, and most of all, to put yourself in a place of solutions to these big problems we all face as a society. There's so much human potential, and all of us really is necessary. All of us really are necessary to create the kind of world we want in the future. I really appreciate you having me here. Thank you.